All right, well, let's get into our main discussion. This section will be Beyond the Free Cities, as I said, and we will be starting with possibly one of the coolest places in the Lands of Ice and Fire, or maybe the place you might most like to live, the Summer Isles. And they are located south of Westeros and cradled in the warm blue waters of the Summer Sea. They are an archipelago consisting of over 50 islands, many of which can be walked across in an hour, but the largest, Jala, is hundreds of leagues of green forests, mountains, and rivers teeming with crocodiles. Thousands of flowers bloom there, filling the air with perfume. There are fruits and colorful birds, and the native summer islanders make beautiful feather cloaks out of their plumage. And I think, Linecom, you had a comparison possibly with the Caribbean for real-world history.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a area with islands and potential conflict and things like that, personally as an American, it made me think about the Caribbean and the age of exploration and things like that. But before I go into that, I was just curious, the part where you read about the flowers, what do you guys think has more pound-for-pound flowers, Summer Islands or the Reach?
I don't
Well,
know.
it depends. I think if you just say...
Yeah, I'd say
Yeah, I
Summer
think
Islands
so.
because they seem to grow there sort of wildly, whereas the Reach is more, they're all into gardening and sort of, taming flowers, where the Summer Islands seem wild.
Yeah, and even so, maybe not, but if you get more like colorful flowers maybe in the Summer Islands, because you might have a lot of wild, like normal temperate weather wildflowers in the Reach, while you might get a lot of orchids and really fragrant flowers there. So it's I don't think there's. I don't know if there's any of them that has more than the other, but you definitely would notice the Summer Island flowers more. I think.
Yeah, more of a tropical sort of humid.
Yeah.
Is there a
exactly.
real world island area that's known in our planet for having a lot of flowers or being very like fertile?
Well, Hawaii. That's what these kind of gave me more of a Hawaiian vibe than when I first read it. Just with the the isolation and the big island and the small island, and it all seems like it's one kind of self-contained culture.
And,
generally any volcanic island is very fertile.
Do the Summer Islands, are they volcanic?
I don't know. Say, actually, but they might be. They probably are.
They might be, yeah. And the Summer Islanders themselves have skin as black as polished jet. For much of the history, they lived in isolation. Their original maps from ancient times only showed the islands themselves and then a vast blue ocean surrounding them. And I thought that might have been a bit of sort of meta-commentary on Yandel's part, or I guess Martin's part, in terms of the fact that there probably are a lot of islands and a lot of sort of locations on Essos that aren't marked, that are probably there simply because explorers haven't discovered them. So that's why sort of Essos looks so vast and barren. But there might be a lot of places that are there that haven't been charted.
Yeah. Excuse me for inserting race so early into this discussion, but it seems like George uses the term "black as jet" as a very common metaphor for blackness. Was that how it was done in medieval times? The medieval representation of something that was color-wise at least very dark colored, very like purely black colored.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's coming from a very sort of Eurocentric point of view where they're sort of grading shades of skin. So I guess is jet a very richly black stone?
Yeah.
So they describe the Dornish as copper-skinned, and then the Summer Islanders as black, polished black. Yeah.
Right.
In Herodotus, he uses comparisons to wood sometimes to describe people's skin color. Like I think he even uses teak at one point.
From my limited carpenter stuff, teak is more like copper, and it's not as. I think he was using that to show the difference that there's different skin colors. There's copper skinned, and then there's. I don't want to say black, but dark as jet. I'm trying to not be
Northern African and Southern African. That's what I sort of imagine.
Yeah, Sub-Saharan versus
Sub-Saharan.
I just feel like I feel like I don't take a walk in the woods and just like look like pick up a stone that's like, oh, here's a piece of polished jet or something. You know what I mean?
If you lived on a volcano, you might.
Yeah, well, if that's all you knew,
if
you knew the Earth that much more intimately, then we don't really know nature, I guess, that closely. We live in cities and things. But race is a kind of interesting topic in this, particularly in the kind of Sothros section. It can get a bit, I don't know, it feels a bit racist, or maybe that's the commentary that Martin's providing in terms of describing these black sort of savages. But the Summer Islanders are very favorably described from Westeros' perspective, which is interesting because you'd think, I don't know, racism would be more prevalent in, I guess, a medieval sort of society, but they're not really, it's not as present as I thought it would be in Westeros. It's more of a classism kind of discrimination.
Well, the sort of history of racism, at least that I learned, was that, in medieval times they didn't have a concept of sort of racism. It was all like more like tribal. Like the French didn't necessarily think that they were anything like the Spanish, so they couldn't, really be racist against Africans to the extent that they encountered them.
Yeah, and it was probably more, I guess, the Crusades when, I guess, Europeans who were formerly fighting with each other were sort of united under this idea of a Europeanism or a Christendom, I guess. They started to get into the idea of racism and anti-East and all that.
Yeah, I think it also came from a whole, exploration period where you could easily see the division between the a bit more technologically advanced European countries and African and India.
It became a very, convenient way to look at things when, in the age when Europe was doing things like taking slaves from Africa and, conquering various places that they wanted to conquer. So, it was very convenient for them to develop racism right at the time when they sort of, needed it to justify what they were doing. Like, I think Voltaire said something like, we must assume that these people are not human, because if we don't do that, then how can we believe that we're Christians?
Mm-hmm. Taking the discussion back to the World of Ice and Fire, Duncan, you mentioned Southros, and that's something I was asking myself when I read. I don't think the native people of Southros are even black necessarily, because obviously it's very obvious from the description of the Summer Islanders that these are black folks that George R. R. Martin's describing. But then that thing is that I sort of automatically assume that the native Southros were probably black as well, but there's nothing explicitly saying what the color of their skin were. All it says is that they had dark hair. It doesn't mention anything about their skin color.
Yeah, they're
maybe that's just an assumption that is not necessarily true. Black.
I meant more that it seemed like the descriptions of them were racist, regardless of what their skin color was. It seemed like they were being described as this sort of subhuman race, which indeed they may that is the sort of theme in this series. There are these deviations of humanity, the sort of Neanderthal men and even lizard men and the dwarf men. And so there's a lot of, I guess, even though the sort of Homo sapiens are the dominant, I guess, species in this world, there are these sort of derivations which might be or it might just be good old sort of Westerosi, Eurocentric racism. We don't know.
Yeah, that just hit me, really. Either Westeros and Essos is very interconnected and very well informed about other cultures very far away, or maybe it's just plain old Orientalism again.
And of course, interaction plays a big part in it. I mean, the Summer Islanders are evidently formidable in battle. They're traders. I mean, they have a lot of interaction with the ports of Westeros. So Westeros is going to be much more familiar with them, as opposed to the Brundlemen, who have this kind of mystique, this mythology around this kind of savage land that they associate with it. So disinformation is the main
factor. And this may be a theme that this is something that I noticed that I thought about when it came to the Summer Island sections. I personally thought it was really interesting, but as a whole, I thought it was frankly poorly written, because there's so many aspects of the Summer Islanders where it seemed almost contradictory, and they didn't really go into that much depth on explaining some of the things, and we'll encounter these as we go along, that I frankly thought were just poorly explained or just hard to believe was actually true.
Well, this whole book is full of contradiction. I think that's part of what the book is doing. So unless it's like bad writing that just editors didn't pick up on, but I think a lot of that stuff's intentional.
Yeah, in the context of a fantasy world, I don't particularly have a problem with it as far as the Summer Islanders society, but there's certainly no society like that on Earth really that we could particularly relate it to. I mean,
and I'll try to point out the things I'm talking about as we get to them. But one of the things to bring it up off the top of my head is, as Duncan mentioned, they're known to be really good warriors, and they're known to be really good at archery. And they mentioned the goldenwood longbows or whatever that they use. And one thing that they mentioned is that that this is a climate that didn't have a lot of metals, so they never really developed like swords or like armor. And I'm curious as how can a society get so good at fighting by just using archery? Like I find that hard to believe. They have to have some kind of hand-to-hand weapon, right?
Or trade,
they
obviously.
Had spears and stuff, but I think they have the reputation for being good warriors, just like they're good archers from ships. and that's what they do most. But like,
But they're also described as going out into the world and joining, being very highly regarded in sellsword companies and things. So they do fight hand to hand, it would seem. But I would imagine it would just be trade. That's how they'd acquire various metals. They do trade a lot with Essos and Westeros.
And they can defend their ships. Like, slavers flee because they're like, oh shit, it's them gold heart bows.
Yeah, well, talking a bit more about the exploration, in ancient times, the Summer Islanders did venture into Satharos. They founded ancient cities there, which have since been wiped from existence. Some of their lore describes this sort of ancient dark force that destroyed Giscari and Valerian settlements as well. So we don't really know what that is. It might be the evil plague that seems to exist there, or dragons, or wyverns, or whatever. Their first outside contact with another race was with the Giscari, who thought they were demons burned black and steered clear of the Isles, showing some more of that irrational fear. And once they realized there were more people outside the islands, they began to venture out more and started a thriving trade with Valeria. They traded gems for iron and tin, so that might be how they get access to swords and things. The fashion of the Summer Islands became fashionable in Valeria.
Now, one thing that I found hard to believe is that he mentioned how that the Summer Islanders, they had a strong advantage in two different military aspects. They had some of the best bowmen and archery archers in the world, and they also had the strongest navy basically in the world in these swan ships. And George mentions that this is not a warlike people. They never really conquered anyone else. They never tried conquering anyone else. And I just find that really hard. Really, dude? I don't know how could they not conquer anyone else? You got the Iron Islanders who are assholes all the time. You have Westerosi. You have Noth, which is basically just asking to get colonized. You have the Basilisk Isles. I just find it hard to believe that a civilization like this is really believable. They have two real strong advantages, and it's they would never use that to conquer another.
They're not that great military advantages, though, because the bowmen and the ships basically, allow them to do great on sea. But if if an army of Summer Islanders landed in Westeros, anybody who managed to fight them hand to hand, they would lose.
Yeah, I guess part of it is their religious beliefs that they don't fight amongst themselves, so they don't have that kind of organized military, because why would they? They would never be able to invade another country by land. They do have very formidable ships. I don't know if they have a great navy, though. They just have very highly regarded vessels that are well protected, but I don't know if they have
you could form them into a navy though. If
you could, I suppose. Yeah. It's just
but that's the thing is that George goes out of his way. You mentioned that they don't fight amongst themselves, and he mentioned that ritualized warfare, but they're also not a very united island. There's no one ruler. There's actually several different princes and lords, and they do have conflict with one another. And they used to sell each other into slavery before, when they did participate in the slave trade. So these islanders did have conflict with one another, so I find it hard to believe they didn't have conflict with non-Summer Islanders.
They did used to, sell slaves to the Old Gist and the Basilisk Islands, but that is it's called the Years of Shame, so that is thought of as a very dark period. So I don't think they would ever look upon that fondly. And I guess this practice was overturned by a female ruler, who invented the golden longbows and taught them to build ships. And I guess that maybe created a more unifying kind of mythology and identity of who they were, sort of them against the world kind of thing. That might account for some of the lack of conflict or lack of hostility. And of course, they do obviously fight amongst themselves, but it is a very sort of organized form of combat. And even the defeated parties are not necessarily killed. They're just kind of exiled and their lands are acquired.
Do you think it might be some sort of reverse racism or something? You have this culture that is probably a stand-in for black people. Would you want to give them too many bad traits, or would you actually want to sort of try to break with some of the usual stereotypes you would normally associate with, or a lot of racist people would associate with black people?
You mean on Martin's part that he would have?
On Martin's part, I think it's a conscious choice to see, okay, they're black-skinned, but they are maybe one of the best societies in the world.
Right, and it's almost maybe not reverse racism as much as it is white guilt. He kind of goes overboard on the fact of trying to portray them against this traditional stereotype of what black people historically were portrayed as, unintelligent and warlike and stuff like that. And he's trying to obviously break, traditional stereotypes. But to me, it's almost to the point of unbelievability. Really, dude? This is still the medieval ages, man. Everybody has wars, everybody fights. Like that's just a human nature thing. It has nothing to do with race.
Yeah, but
Well, isn't that
geographically,
the point?
they're the
They
outliers
fight
on the
though.
map, but they're in a position that they don't need to partake of those wars because no one's coming to them. They're not, they've gone out of their way not to invade, and they don't need to until they get involved in the slavery wars. It looks like.
Well, that's my next question: is why is it that this is a land that has but they don't have any iron, they have no metal. This is a giant fertile area with according to the book, tons of spice, hardwoods, and gemstones. Like, why aren't the Iron Islanders trying to attack them? Like that, this seems like a perfect area to reeve if I was an Iron Islander. Or why aren't there other people like trying to attack them? You know what I mean? This seems like a really valuable area. So I'm surprised that there's not much interaction with other island cultures.
They are very isolated. They're quite far away.
I think their
from the
isolation
mainland.
is a real point in their favor.
And they know
Like,
those waters better than anyone, and they have these very formidable ships that can take on Iron Men and win, as we see in A Feast for Crows.
So if we had a Navy power ranking, would we put the Summer Island Navy over the British Navy?
Well,
No.
I guess maybe per capita, but obviously they have way fewer ships than the Bravosi or the Iron Island.
It's
Okay.
mentioned that the Summer Island ships are magically sealed together, so they have like +10 magic bonus for hardness.
That's a good point.
Like if you ran them against any other ship, they're most likely gonna stay intact.
Which is why I thought of it as this huge advantage. Like, there's no ship that can ram them, so that makes it from a naval standpoint in the medieval times. Like, ramming was what naval fighting was all about. So if no one can, like, I would think, like, why would if I was the Reach, say Old Town, I would hire a whole bunch of Summer Island, ships to guard my land against Iron Island raiders because these ships are badass, right?
As a coast guard, though, they're not that great because they depend on the wind.
I would say at this point in the technological advance period, I would say that ramming wasn't yet the main strategy because you didn't have the size of boats that would be able to do that. Unless of course the swan ship is the size of a galleon because it has to be pretty big to house a lot of archers like that. But essentially,
They are mentioned as being the biggest ships, like 3 tiers high and shit. Like,
And they're primarily for trade and for transporting cargo, aren't they? Like the archery unit is just to protect the valuables.
yeah.
They're definitely ramming in naval warfare, though. If you go back and read the Blackwater chapters, they definitely use rams and stuff there in the Battle of the Blackwater.
Yeah, but you couldn't like do it with a longship normally, and half of the fleet is longships. Then you have cogs, which are the smaller versions, like a mini version of a galleon. So maybe you could do it with that one, but usually it wouldn't help you very much to ram any ship with a longboat. I would put forth.
Right, but George goes
like
out of his way
Stannis's-
to mention that the strength of the swan ships is that no one could ram them. So if because that was mentioned, I would assume that this was a time when ramming was a big naval tool.
maybe for the big ships. Like, longships can't ram, all other ships can.
Warships only.
Oh, I forgot. There's galleys, and galleys they did use that tactics in Roman and Phoenician warfare. So yeah, okay, I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's what I.
Those old triremes that rammed other ships, they were very specialized. They couldn't carry cargo, so you can't like steal a ship's cargo and then take it with you. And they couldn't even sleep on the ship. They would have to beach it every night. So it was very specialized in the way that it was used.
Sure. I was just remembering the whole. I was just thinking through a whole Viking warfare view and yeah. But yeah,
Other cultures have boats, Patrick. It's not just the Vikings.
I've just come
Shattered.
out of the Iron
He's shattered.
Island. I was actually surprised when I learned that, but yeah, I've been told.
Yeah.
You didn't read about the Danish Navy when they tried to attack the Bismarck in World War I, and they just
They don't
The
teach
ship-
that in Denmark.
they couldn't board those sheer sides with their long.
Oh, we almost won that one.
Yeah. It's a
Did
close
anybody
one.
here think that obviously one thing that I really thought of as just a sort of a guys' night out topic is when they talk about how good these Golden Heart bows were, I started thinking obviously, okay, in my mind the best bow in the world of Westeros is the Dragonbone bow. And they explicitly say that the only bow that the Golden Heart bows don't match up with are the Dragonbone bows. But I also started thinking, like, remember Bloodraven had that badass Weirwood bow? So I was trying to think, like, if we could make a longbow power ranking, what would you guys have as the top? Like, what would you guys feel would be the order of the top bows.
I was wondering if the Golden Grove and the Weirwood might be related, or even it's like different names for the same tree or something. But yeah, they both seem to have magical properties. And they talk about talking trees as well, don't they? So I thought maybe there's old gods are there, they're present or something.
Yeah, but my impression of the talking trees was that was more like a Trajan column kind of thing. Like that's what they carved their histories into, and they're telling the history. I didn't think that those were magical in themselves.
No, they explicitly say that.
Because I know there's Weirwood arrows that I think Torrin's brother carved that he was trying to take down Aegon's dragons. But Bloodraven has a Weirwood bow, does he?
I thought he did. I thought they said that was the Duncan eggs. Yeah.
Yeah, and people believe that he uses magic on it, like in the Sworn Sword, the
Stupid
what's his
people
name, Sir Useless.
So maybe if they can get a Golden Grove longbow and a Weirwood arrow, they can take down a dragon.
Now the bow that Dany got in the stories that was like one of her wedding gifts, and it was like considered like one of the best bows you could possibly get. It was a dragonbone bow, which are theoretically resistant to fire, and I think the ones that are traditionally used in like your standard bow that are used in say like Casterly Rock or Winterfell, those are sinew bows or yew bows or whatever.
And dragonbone bows are extremely rare. And Golden Grove is less rare because it's quite plentifully grown on the Summer Island, but it's forbidden to be exported, which is why it's so hard to get your hands on it. Unless you're a summoner.
Right, so I would think if I was a king, if I was like the Lord of Winterfell, like I go out of my way to find me a Summer Islander friend and buy a golden wood bow or golden heart bow because it's hard to get. It's not really technically legal to sell, but you would think this is something that would be extremely valuable to really come across.
Gotta hit up Jalabar Joe next time you're at King's Landing. And,
yeah, should have tried to get a line back to Summer Islands. Yeah.
So in my personal power ranking, I got Dragonbone 1, Golden Heart 2, Weirwood 3, and everything else lower.
Yeah.
I would then Forrester Ironwood beats them all.
Non-canon.
Is that canon?
It will be.
Well, I don't know. They talk to George, so I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe he's just saying it could possibly be there.
It's fine.
So.
It's fine.
But yeah,
get more derailed than we need to.
Now, also, the Iron Islanders were known for having very good archery as well, right? That was explicitly stated in the stories. And Theon was supposed to be a really good archer, right?
No, are they? I they considered it cowardly.
No, remember when...
that was something that Theon got good at, but that was when I thought he was being trained at Winterfell. That was something he kind of did that was an aberration.
That was something they mentioned in the show, but was it also in the books? Got to be careful not to mix these.
Yeah.
Well, no, he was a good archer in the books because he was.
He was a good archer in both, but in the show he says Iron Islanders famed for their archery, navigation, and lovemaking. Like, yeah, whatever, Theon.
And being
so maybe that was
and failed rebellions.
Okay.
Well, going back to some of the flora and fauna, we hear about a few other cool things. We hear about lean red wolves and panthers that prowl the rainforests. We hear about monkeys. We hear about apes, possibly, called the Old Red Men of Umburo. So I thought that might have been some more Neanderthalic men, or maybe just regular apes.
Yeah, the old
Yeah,
red men
you have
the orangutans, and the silver pelts are the gorillas, and I don't know what a night stalker is.
I thought they might have been like the bonobo ape, which even in our world we don't really understand very well. It's kind of like a giant chimpanzee that they say exists in the jungles of the Congo, and it's sort of a newer great ape that has been recently discovered.
We hear about the singing stones, which are rocks that have been naturally shaped into various, or maybe it's man-made, either way, have been shaped into various forms, and then as the wind flows through them, it creates music. So that's pretty cool.
It's a cool idea.
It's too bad we don't have Ellie Ward here to complain about, the fact that these animals didn't exist in the New World.
Well, this isn't the New World.
Whatever. Whatever it is that he
It's the
complains
Summer
about.
Islands.
Yeah, I guess there isn't an equivalent necessarily, like geographically to our own world, like this little island below Europe that's like this.
Yeah.
One thing I liked is I thought George did a good job of coming up with with different names that sounded like they were different, but that they all came from the same place. As far as the Summer Islander names, they sound different than Dothraki names or names from anywhere else. I thought he did a pretty good job with his names in this.
Yeah, we get a few characters in the main books. Salabar Zo is obviously the exiled prince who stays in Robert's court. We get Zondo, who's the mate on the Cinnamon Wind, who takes Samwell from Bravos to Old Town.
Have you mentioned the Stonehead Island?
Yeah,
That has...
the Stonehead Island. It's an island with forgotten gods on it, and they're all... Are they facing the direction of Westeros?
I think they face the sea because it says that it's the last thing you see when you sail away. The Summer Islanders.
Back to West.
So
Is that like
obviously
Easter Island?
it made me think about the Easter Island
Maybe, yeah.
Stoneheads, but it may not be the same thing because the Easter Island it was separately made statues, whereas this sounds like the whole island was formed into one giant stone megalith. So it may not be exactly the same.
And it might have been
Those
like
old gods got around.
And it might have, well, they're stone, but it might have been various parts of the island that they've dragged there, which is quite a feat. We also hear about an island called Abulu, which served as a desolate location for Nymeria and her ships after they fled the Valerian expansion. It was their last stop until they made their way to Dawn, which is kind of interesting. And the island is still inhabited by the descendants of Roynar.
And it's now the Isle of Women. That's what it's called now.
Yeah, and women seem to be treated equally to men on this island. They fight alongside men in battle. And
Yeah, a lot of gender equality, and I think this is one of the least magical cultures that has gender equality. So I think that's also interesting. Because like the only other cultures I can think of are the Roynar and the Valerians, which were sort of equal, and you can understand that kinda because magic is an equalizer of sorts. But yeah.
Do we know if
like the
slavery is legal
priestess.
here or not?
No, it's forbidden.
No, it's forbidden, yeah. That's why
no
How do we
more
know that?
after years of shame.
yeah, they despise slavery after the years of shame.
Yeah,
Okay.
they'd call it the years of
Okay.
profit if it weren't.
The golden years.
Yeah.
Years of getting paid.
One thing I thought about is that it seems like, culturally speaking, the book mentions the role of, the religion that props up sexuality, and it's not really sort of a taboo in this culture. And obviously, noble people can, work as sort of what we would consider, prostitutes, and it's actually considered a noble profession. So does that mean that consent doesn't exist? Like, you could still theoretically rape someone, right? It just doesn't happen.
I'm sure rape
think
happens.
so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I would
It
say
says
that it means
think
the
the-
opposite.
I think that would have been said. I don't know.
Well, because it says that during their wars, like those ritualized wars, like the fields aren't burned, the small folk aren't murdered, and women are not raped. So that just makes me think, like, does the concept of rape just not exist here? Because they're so, like, sex is such a normal thing, and it's so easy to access, and it's so, like, not looked at. Like, maybe there's just no need to rape anyone.
Well, it's described as it's described as so their god is the god of beauty and fertility. Sexual intercourse is sacred, regarded as creation of love and life. And yeah, all Summer Islanders are expected to dwell in the temple of love for a time, and to share their body with anyone who desires it. So I guess I don't know. It's not really stated whether consent is.
Outside of that, though, I mean, you're going to have sexual deviants that want to just do terrible things, and so yeah.
Yeah, do you think there's all like trips to Summer Islands? I guess it's way too far away for anyone to have that instinct, like seedy people from Dawn and stuff.
Yeah, I think they go to Lease for that.
Yeah.
That's a much shorter trip.
And one thing I thought of is when they were describing those temples, where everyone has to sort of spend time in and stuff like that, and it says that you're supposed to be obviously open to any visitor of the temple to have sexual relations with. So does that include, like, even people from, say, a rival enemy like Summer Island that your tribe is not necessarily friendly with, or even if, say, you're like a Westerosi that's visiting the Summer Islands, are they supposed to be just as welcoming to them too, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess I've got to assume you have to
Probably.
be part of the religion. You have to be part of the culture. You can't just visit the Summer Islands and do what you want. It has to be very ritualized.
I imagine they'd have a lot of conversion if anyone went to go visit those.
In the ancient world, they did something like this in Babylon and Mesopotamian cultures. It's mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and they would have to go to the temple, and they would have to be a temple prostitute, and people would pay the temple in order to use their services or whatever, and so that's a real thing that they're getting from the Middle East, and. But you get a sense, and I think there's a line in Herodotus where he says, like, really rich women were sort of like snuck into it, and then they'd have someone like preset to go, to go in like right after they become accessible, and so they wouldn't
And
have
they've
to.
done their service, and they can just get out.
Yeah, pretty much.
So it wasn't exactly a parallel. I mean, it was still a taboo. Like, it wasn't, it was looked down upon if a noble woman went into that kind of a business, right?
Well, no, she had to do it too, but she didn't
Oh,
want to
had
do
to.
it with like any commoner. You had to accept whoever wanted you. So.
Yeah. It seems like women are in charge of these temples, that they're given a lot of power, priestesses. So I don't know. I guess I don't think it is this kind of rape thing. I think it is on the level, but I guess we can't really speak to it one way or the other. We're not given enough information.
I think the indirect information we get from various Summer Islanders that we come across the Song of Ice and Fire proper, like Alayaya and Shataya and stuff like that, is that I think it's pretty clear that the women themselves are willingly doing this, and it's not like the people in these temples are doing it for non-consensual reasons or anything like that. I just wanted to make the point, like, it seems like because this is something that's so easily accessible and is such a no big deal thing, that I think I wonder if the sort of the social scourge of rape itself just doesn't maybe exist as much in this culture because it's such an easily accessible thing. Like, why would you need to rape anyone if all you got to do is just walk over to the temples and get sexually satisfied? If that's what you're looking for. You know?
The research on rape suggests, though, that the guys who do it because they like to rape. It's not anything involving whether they can find consensual sex or not, because they don't want consensual sex. They want to hurt somebody.
Yeah, that's true. It's an act of power.
So I don't think there's a connection.
If you think of sex as like a sacred thing, there's definitely ways to make it wrong. So I think definitely rape is possible in this culture.
Yeah, I guess I associate it more with the kind of like, is it Greece where they had these they did drugs and they would just have these huge orgies and it'd be like this out of body experience kind of thing. So it seems more ceremonial, like this just giving over to whatever.
No, that was a Moby concert.
You were thinking of 300. It's not
300. Oh god, no, the worst, the opposite of the Summer Island.
That was the Romans at the Bacchic orgies. Orgy used to mean a religious ceremony, but the Romans turned it into its modern connotation because of the way they practiced these Bacchic rituals. They basically turned them into like parties.
If you got it, flaunt it, guys. Come on, it's the Romans.
Romans get some. Any other points on the Summer Islands?
I just had one quick thing. When they talked about the ships being made without any, like, no nail or anything, I was under the impression that they were like very good at fitting, wood together and using sort of resins and everything. But then in the picture on page 281, you see the size of the trees, and now I'm just thinking they're just carved out of one tree because those trees are like bigger than redwoods. Like seriously, like if they chop one of those things down,
yeah, those are some trees.
6 boats out of that.
Yeah, I'm thinking the giant ones you get in Madagascar. Like those are the tall trees of Tall Tree Town.
Yeah, just like cut it down and then carve it into a.
You can make several
vessel.
ships out of
Yeah,
that.
6 ships out of one tree. Yeah.
Cool.